"I've lost everything." She cried. The Mafia boss took her hand and said, "Not while I breathe." The rain in Greyhaven did not wash things clean. It only seemed to make the grime of the city stick harder to the pavement, turning the streets into slick, dark mirrors reflecting the gray sky. For 29-year-old Emily Carter, the weather felt like a personal insult, a final, damp punctuation mark on the worst week of her life. It had started at 8 in the morning in the plush, beige-carpeted office of the hotel general manager. Emily had walked in with her head held high, clutching a file folder that contained the incident report she had filed the previous night. She was the assistant manager, a position she had worked 60-hour weeks to secure, and she took her duty of care seriously. When a VIP guest, a man who owned half the car dealerships in the state, had cornered one of the young housekeepers in the hallway, Emily had intervened. She had been professional, firm, and unyielding. She expected backing. Instead, she found herself staring at the general manager, Mr. Henderson, who refused to meet her eyes. "We have to let you go." "Emily," Henderson said, shuffling papers on his desk. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. She gripped the back of the chair in front of her. "Excuse me?" "Mr. Sterling is a valued guest," Henderson mumbled. "He claims you were aggressive, that you were hysterical and made a scene in the lobby. We can't have unstable management staff facing our high-end clientele." "Unstable," Emily repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "He was forcing himself on Elena. I stepped between them. That is not unstable. That is doing my job. We are calling it a restructuring," Henderson said, finally looking up with a gaze that was cold and dismissive. "Security will escort you out. Please leave your badge on the desk." 10 minutes later, Emily was standing on the sidewalk, a cardboard box of her personal belongings rapidly dampening in the mist. The injustice of it burned in her throat. Hot and choking, she had followed every rule, worked every holiday, and fixed every problem, only to be discarded the moment she became inconvenient to a wealthy man's ego. She needed to go home. She needed to regroup. But first, she needed to check on the diner. The salty, greasy smell of the blue spoon had been the background scent of her childhood. It was a small, narrow diner on the east side of Greyhaven that her father had left her when he passed away 2 years ago. It had been struggling for a decade, bleeding money slowly, but it was the only piece of him she had left. She had been pouring her own salary into it for months, trying to keep the lights on and the creditors at bay. When she arrived, the closed sign was hanging crookedly in the window, which was odd for a Tuesday lunch rush. A black sedan was parked in the loading zone, and a man in a sharp gray suit was taping a piece of paper to the glass of the front door. Emily dropped her box on the wet pavement and ran toward him. "Hey, what are you doing?" The man turned. His face was blank, his eyes devoid of sympathy. "Are you Emily Carter?" "Yes," she said, breathless. He handed her a thick envelope. "You have been served. This property has been seized by West End Holdings regarding outstanding liens and defaulted loans. The locks have been changed. You have 24 hours to contest, but I will tell you now. The paperwork is ironclad. Seized?" Emily looked at the diner, her heart hammering against her ribs. "There must be a mistake. I made the interest payment last week. I sent the check. The principal balance was called in. The man said, checking his watch, 'It is all in the file. Good day, Miss Carter.'" He walked past her, got into his sedan, and drove away, leaving her standing in front of the dark diner. She pressed her hand against the cold glass, looking inside at the dusty booths and the counter where she used to do her homework while her dad grilled burgers. Gone. Just like that, a shell company she had never heard of had swallowed her legacy whole. Panic began to set in, a cold, creeping thing that made her fingers numb. She needed to talk to Ryan. Ryan would know what to do. Ryan was a paralegal. He had promised to handle the bills, to look over the contracts. He had told her not to worry about the diner's finances, that he was taking care of the restructuring. She grabbed her wet cardboard box and hailed a cab, counting the crumpled bills in her wallet. She had just enough to get back to her apartment. The building she lived in was a walk-up in a neighborhood that was trying to be trendy but was mostly just expensive and noisy. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs, her legs feeling heavy as lead. She just wanted to sit on the couch, have Ryan hold her, and tell her they would figure it out. When she reached her landing, she stopped. The door to apartment 3B was ajar. The wood around the lock was splintered, jagged shards sticking out where the deadbolt had been forced. "Ryan?" she called out, pushing the door open. Silence answered her. Emily stepped inside, and her breath hitched in a sob. The apartment was trashed, not by a random burglar, but systematically cleared out. The television was gone. Her laptop was gone. The antique jewelry box that had sat on her dresser was missing. She ran to the bedroom closet. Ryan's clothes were gone. His shoes, his bags, his collection of watches, all gone. She rushed to the kitchen counter where they kept the emergency jar, a ceramic pot where they had been saving cash for a wedding. She turned it over. Empty. On the wall, taped with blue painter's tape, was a bright orange piece of paper, an eviction notice. Unpaid rent for 3 months. She stared at the paper, unable to comprehend the words. Ryan had said he paid the rent on the 1st. He had shown her the transfers. He had lied about everything. Emily sank onto the floor, the damp cardboard box beside her. The silence of the empty apartment was deafening. In the span of 6 hours, she had lost her career, her father's legacy, her home, her savings, and the man she thought she was going to marry. It was a clean sweep, a total demolition of her life. The super of the building appeared in the doorway 10 minutes later, looking apologetic but firm. He told her the marshals were coming in an hour to change the locks properly. She had to leave. And so, Emily found herself sitting on the curb outside her building. The drizzle had turned into a steady, soaking rain. She huddled inside her thin coat, her hair plastered to her skull, her arms wrapped around the soggy cardboard box that contained a stapler, a framed photo of her dad, and a potted succulent that looked as miserable as she felt. She was 29 years old, and she had nothing. No money for a hotel, no family to call, no friends who could take her in on such short notice without asking questions she did not have the strength to answer. A sleek black car, long and polished like a weapon, slowed down as it drove down the street. It pulled up directly in front of where she was sitting. The window tint was so dark she could not see inside. Emily did not even look up. She stared at the water rushing into the storm drain near her feet, swirling with cigarette butts and oil. The car doors opened. 2 men stepped out. They were large, wearing dark raincoats that did not conceal the bulk of muscle beneath. They did not look like police, and they certainly did not look like social workers. "Miss Carter," one of them said. His voice was gravel over concrete. Emily looked up, squinting through the rain. Who was asking? "Mr. Moretti would like a word," the man said. The name meant nothing to her, and yet it sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "I do not know a Mr. Moretti, and I am not going anywhere." The second man stepped closer. He was not aggressive, but his presence was a wall she could not walk through. "It concerns your father's debts. Miss Carter, it is not a request." "Debts?" Emily let out a dry, hysterical laugh. "I do not have any money. You can take the box. It has a stapler in it. That is all I have left." "Mr. Moretti prefers to discuss financial matters in person," the first man said. He opened the back door of the car. "It is dry inside. Please." Emily looked at the open door, then at the desolate street. She had nowhere to go. If these men wanted to kill her, they probably would have done it already. And if they just wanted to talk about money she did not have, well, she had plenty of practice with that today. She stood up, her legs trembling, and climbed into the back of the car. The interior smelled of leather and expensive cedar. The ride was silent. The men did not speak, and Emily stared out the window as the city blurred past. They drove toward the downtown district, stopping in front of an upscale Italian restaurant called Bella Nata. It was a place Emily had walked past 100 times but could never afford to enter. They led her not through the main entrance, where warm golden light spilled onto the sidewalk, but through a side door, up a flight of stairs, and into a private office. The room was dimly lit, dominated by dark wood and the scent of rich tobacco and espresso. A large mahogany desk sat in the center of the room, and behind it sat a man who looked like he owned the night itself. Dante Moretti was younger than she expected, perhaps in his early 30s, but his eyes were ancient. They were dark, intelligent, and terrifyingly calm. He wore a suit that cost more than her father's diner was worth, cut to fit broad shoulders and a powerful frame. He did not stand when she entered. He just watched her, his gaze assessing everything, her soaked clothes, her shivering frame, the sheer exhaustion etched into her face in a single sweep. "Sit," he said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth but carrying an edge of absolute authority. Emily sat in the leather chair opposite him, clutching her purse to her chest. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am the man your father borrowed money from 5 years ago to keep his kitchen running," Dante said calmly. He opened a ledger on his desk, a substantial sum. He made payments for a time, but the principal remains outstanding, with interest. The figure is significant. He turned the ledger around so she could see the number. It was 6 figures. Emily stared at the number, and the room seemed to tilt. "My father. He borrowed from a bank. Banks do not lend to dying businesses with bad credit." "Miss Carter," Dante said, his face impassive. "Your father came to us. We provided the capital, now that he is gone, and the property has been seized by West End Holdings, a competitor of mine. I might add, the debt falls to the estate, to you." Emily felt the air leave her lungs. She shook her head, water droplets flying from her hair. "I did not know. He never told me." "Ignorance does not cancel the debt," Dante said, though his tone was not mocking. It was simply stating a fact, like commenting on the weather. The dam broke, the professional composure she had held onto through the firing, the stoic shock she had maintained at the diner, the numbness at the apartment. It all shattered. "I do not have it," she whispered, her voice cracking. Dante watched her, his fingers steepling together. "I do not have it," she cried out, the sound raw and jagged. "I lost my job this morning. My apartment is gone. My fiancé stole my savings and left me. They took the diner. I have $12 in my pocket and a box of office supplies. That is it." Tears spilled over, hot and fast, tracking through the rain on her cheeks. She slumped in the chair, burying her face in her hands. "I have lost everything," she sobbed, the words muffled by her cold palms. "There is nothing left to take." For a long moment, there was only the sound of her jagged breathing in the quiet room. Then, she heard the scrape of a chair pushing back. Soft, heavy footsteps approached her. Emily flinched, expecting a blow, or perhaps to be dragged out to the street. Instead, a hand appeared in her vision, a large, tanned hand holding a pristine white linen handkerchief. She looked up, her vision blurry. Dante Moretti was standing right in front of her, leaning against the edge of his desk. He was close enough that she could smell him. Sandalwood, rain, and something sharp like steel. The cold calculation was gone from his eyes, replaced by something darker, heavier and unexpectedly gentle. "Take it," he said softly. Emily reached out with a shaking hand and took the cloth. She wiped her eyes, feeling the expensive fabric against her raw skin. "I do not know what you want me to do," she whispered, looking up at him. "If you are going to hurt me, just do it. I'm too tired to run." Dante's expression tightened, a muscle feathered in his jaw. He stepped closer, encroaching on her space. But instead of fear, she felt a strange, magnetic pull. He reached out, and for a second she stopped breathing, but he did not grab her. He lightly touched her hand where it rested on her knee. His thumb brushed over her knuckles in a slow, rhythmic motion that was shockingly grounding. His skin was warm, his touch firm but restrained. "Not while I breathe," he said. The vow was low, vibrating in the air between them. Emily stared at him, caught in the intensity of his gaze. "What?" "You said you have lost everything," Dante said, his dark eyes locking onto hers. You have not lost your life, and as long as you are standing in my city, under my protection, no one is going to touch you. Not West End Holdings, not your ex-fiancé. No one but the money. Emily stammered. The debt is real, Dante acknowledged, straightening up but keeping his eyes on her, and it must be paid. I do not run a charity, but I am not a monster who bleeds the destitute. He walked back around his desk and pulled out a key card. You need a job. You need a home. I have both. Emily blinked, trying to process the shift in the conversation. What? Bella Naughty needs a hostess who can handle difficult people. You are a manager, correct? You can handle a floor, and my bookkeeper is overwhelmed. You will work here evenings. We will garnish a percentage of your wages to pay down the interest on the debt. It will take time, but you will be square. Work for you, she asked, her voice wary. For the Mafia? For the restaurant, Dante corrected smoothly. Legitimate work. As for housing, he tossed the key card onto the desk. It landed with a soft click. I own several buildings in the city. There is a furnished unit on 4th Street. It is empty. It is yours until you get back on your feet. Emily looked at the key card. It looked like a lifeline, but she knew enough to know there were always strings. Why? She asked. Why help me? You could just have your men break my legs. Dante looked at her, and for a fleeting moment she saw something like loneliness behind the impenetrable armor of his gaze. Because you stood up for a housekeeper against a man who thought money gave him the right to abuse her. He said, I have eyes everywhere. Emily, I know why you were fired. Loyalty and principles are rare commodities in Greyhaven. I value them. He extended his hand toward her again, palm open. Do we have a deal? Emily looked at his hand. It was a deal with the devil. She knew that. He was a criminal, a dangerous man. But the world of good, honest men had chewed her up and spit her out today. The law had failed her. Her fiancé had robbed her. The corporate world had discarded her. This man, this dangerous stranger, was offering her a roof and a chance to survive. She reached out and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and engulfing. Deal, she whispered. Come, Dante said, pulling her gently to her feet. You are shivering. I will drive you to the apartment myself. The drive to the apartment building was different this time. Dante drove, dismissing his driver. The silence in the car was not menacing. It was heavy, charged with a tension Emily could not name. They arrived at a high-rise building that was far nicer than anything she had ever lived in. They rode the elevator up to the 10th floor in silence. The space in the elevator felt impossibly small. Emily was acutely aware of him standing next to her, the heat radiating from his body, the way his suit jacket strained slightly across his shoulders. As the elevator chimed and jerked to a stop, Emily, exhausted and still wearing damp heels, stumbled. Her ankle rolled, and she pitched sideways before she could hit the wall. A strong arm clamped around her waist. Dante caught her effortlessly, pulling her upright. His grip was iron hard, his hand splayed wide against the damp fabric of her coat, pressing into the curve of her waist. Careful, he murmured. Emily looked up. They were inches apart. She could see the flecks of gold in his almost black eyes. She could see the dark stubble on his jaw. The air between them suddenly felt thin, electric. His hand did not immediately let go. He held her there, steadying her, his gaze dropping to her lips for a fraction of a second before snapping back to her eyes. For a heartbeat that lasted too long. Neither of them moved. The danger of him was right there, pressing against her. But so was the safety. Thank you, she breathed, her voice barely audible. Dante slowly released her, his hand lingering for a ghost of a second before falling to his side. He stepped back, clearing his throat, the mask of the stoic boss sliding back into place. The apartment is 10B. The code is on the card. He walked her to the door but did not go in. Get some sleep. Emily, we will discuss the schedule tomorrow. He turned and walked back to the elevator, his strides long and confident. Emily unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was beautiful, modern, warm and dry. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city of Greyhaven. She walked to the window and looked out at the lights shimmering in the rain. Somewhere out there, her old life was gone. Ryan was gone. The diner was gone. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the linen handkerchief Dante had given her. It was still dry in the center. She clenched it in her fist, bringing it to her chest. She was terrified. She was indebted to a crime lord. She was in over her head. But as she looked at the city lights, she realized that for the first time all day, the shaking in her hands had stopped. The monster had offered her a hand when the angels had turned away. And God help her, she had taken it. 2 weeks into her employment at Bella Nata, Emily Carter had learned that the building was not just a restaurant, it was a living, breathing creature with 2 distinct hearts beating in opposition to one another. The first heart beat upstairs, in the dining room where crystal chandeliers cast a warm, flattering glow over the city's elite. Here, the air smelled of truffle oil, expensive Barolo wine, and the faint, powdery perfume of women who had never worked a day in their lives. As the hostess, Emily stood at the mahogany podium, greeting senators and CEOs with a polished smile that did not reach her eyes. She managed the reservation book with the same fierce efficiency she had once used at the hotel, smoothing over ruffled feathers and ensuring the nightly ballet of service ran without a hitch. But the second heart beat downstairs, and its rhythm was darker, slower, and far more dangerous. The basement level was technically where the administrative offices and dry storage were located. In reality, it was the nerve center of the Moretti crime family. The air down here was cooler, smelling of damp concrete and gun oil. Men who did not look like waiters sat in the back room, playing cards and cleaning weapons that gleamed dully under the fluorescent lights. Conversation stopped abruptly whenever Emily walked past with her ledger, replaced by heavy, watchful silences. She tried to keep her head down. She tried to be invisible. But invisibility was difficult when she was the one tasked with untangling the financial Gordian knot Dante Moretti called a bookkeeping system. On a rainy Tuesday evening, Emily sat in the small, windowless office that had been assigned to her. The desk was piled high with receipts, invoices, and a heavy, leather-bound ledger that dated back 3 years. Dante had been right. The previous bookkeeper had been either incompetent or overwhelmed. The numbers did not balance. Emily rubbed her temples, the headache that had started at noon pulsing behind her eyes. She reached for her lukewarm coffee and took a sip, her eyes scanning the columns of figures for the 100th time. There it was again. She ran her finger down the line item. It was a recurring payout labeled simply as maintenance services. It appeared every month, always for a different, odd amount, $4,220 one month, $3,980 the next. It was just irregular enough to look like billable hours for a contractor, but just consistent enough to be suspicious. Emily cross-referenced the vendor code with the master list she had spent the last week compiling. The code led to a company called West End Holdings. Her breath hitched in her throat. West End Holdings. The name was branded into her memory. It was the shell company that had seized the diner, the faceless entity that had put the eviction notice on the door of her father's legacy. Why was Dante paying them? She opened another file, her heart hammering against her ribs. She began to trace the payments back. These were not incoming funds. They were outgoing. Money was bleeding out of the restaurant's legitimate earnings and vanishing into the accounts of the very same company that had destroyed her life. If Dante owned West End Holdings, he was paying himself, which made no sense for tax evasion purposes in this specific structure. It looked more like theft. It looked like someone was skimming. A chill that had nothing to do with the basement draft slid down her spine. If someone was stealing from Dante Moretti using the same shell company that had targeted her father, then the web connecting her family's ruin to the Mafia was far more tangled than she had realized. It meant her father might not have just been a borrower. He might have been a victim of the same parasite feeding on the Moretti empire. She was about to print the page when a commotion outside the door made her jump. Voices were raised in the corridor, one slurred and angry, the others low and sharp. Emily hesitated, then stood up and cracked the door open. At the end of the hallway, near the staff exit that led to the alley, a scene was unfolding. A man in a disheveled tuxedo, clearly a patron who had wandered down from the main dining room, was swaying on his feet, shouting about a missing wallet. He was belligerent, his face flushed with expensive scotch and entitlement. Two of Dante's soldiers, men Emily knew only as Marco and Luca, were blocking his path. Luca, a man with a short temper and a scar running through his eyebrow, looked ready to snap. His hand was already moving toward the waistband of his trousers, where Emily knew a pistol sat nestled in leather. "Get out of my way, you greaseball," the drunk spat, shoving Luca's shoulder. "I will have this place shut down. I know the mayor." Luca's face darkened, his fist clenching. "Nobody touches me," he snarled, stepping forward with violent intent. Emily flinched, expecting the sickening sound of bone on bone. Enough. The word was not shouted, but it cracked through the tension like a whip. Dante Moretti appeared from the shadows of the stairwell. He was wearing his usual impeccable charcoal suit, his tie loosened slightly at the collar. He did not look angry. He looked bored, which was somehow infinitely more terrifying. He stepped between his soldier and the drunk. He did not shove Luca. He simply placed one hand lightly on the man's chest. It was a restraining gesture, almost gentle, but Emily saw Luca freeze instantly, the rage draining out of him to be replaced by deferential fear. "Boss, this guy is asking for it," Luca muttered. Stepping back, Dante ignored him. He turned his dark gaze onto the drunk patron. The silence that followed was heavy. The drunk man blinked, his bravado wavering under the sheer weight of Dante's presence. "You have lost your way, sir," Dante said. His voice was calm, devoid of the jagged edges of violence, yet it commanded absolute attention. "The exit is that way." "My men will escort you to a cab." The drunk puffed out his chest, trying to rally. "I am not going anywhere until I find my wallet. Your staff stole it. Your wallet is in your left jacket pocket," Dante said, his eyes flicking downward for a fraction of a second. "You placed it there after you paid for the third bottle of Chianti." "Check." The man patted his pocket, frowned, and pulled out the leather billfold. "Oh, go home," Dante said softly, "before you make a mistake that you cannot apologize for." The threat was veiled, wrapped in velvet, but it was unmistakable. The man paled, mumbled an incoherent apology, and allowed Marco to guide him toward the door. Dante remained standing in the hallway, watching them leave. He looked at Luca, who was staring at the floor. Control. "Luca," Dante said quietly, "we are not thugs in an alley. We run a business. If you lay a hand on a civilian inside these walls, you answer to me. Do you understand?" "Yes, boss," Luca whispered. "Get back to work." As Luca scrambled away, Dante turned his head. His eyes locked directly onto the crack in the door where Emily was watching. She gasped and pulled back, her heart racing. She had seen him intimidate. She had seen him command, but she had never seen that specific quality of restraint. He could have let Luca beat the man. He could have hurt him himself. Instead, he had de-escalated the violence with a terrifying discipline. It made him less of a brute and more of a king, and that made him far more dangerous to her peace of mind. Hours later, the restaurant was silent. The last guest had departed. The kitchen staff had scrubbed the stainless steel counters until they gleamed, and the lights in the dining room had been dimmed to a single golden setting. Emily was still in the corner booth of the dining room, surrounded by paperwork. She had brought the files upstairs to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the basement. The rain was lashing against the large pane windows, a rhythmic drumming that usually soothed her, but tonight it only set her nerves on edge. "You are still here." Emily jumped, her pen skidding across the page. She looked up to see Dante standing by the table. He had removed his jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his white dress shirt, revealing forearms that were thick with muscle and lightly dusted with dark hair. He held 2 plates of steaming pasta in his hands. "I have a lot of work to do," Emily said, straightening her papers self-consciously. "The bookkeeping system is complex." Dante set 1 plate down in front of her, carbonara, rich with cream and pancetta, and took the seat opposite her. He placed a fork on her napkin. "It is not complex. It is a disaster. That is why I hired you. but you cannot fix 3 years of mismanagement in one night. Eat." Emily looked at the food. Her stomach gave a traitorous growl. She had not eaten since breakfast. "Thank you," she said, picking up the fork. Dante began to eat, his movements precise and efficient. He watched her for a moment, his gaze lingering on the smudge of ink on her cheekbone and the shadows under her eyes. "You look exhausted," he noted. "I am fine." She lied, taking a bite of the pasta. It was delicious, savory and comforting. "You are a bad liar." "Emily," Dante said, a hint of amusement coloring his tone. "It is a dangerous trait in my line of work, but perhaps a virtue in yours." They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the clinking of silverware and the relentless rain outside. It felt intimate, far too intimate for an employer and an employee, especially when the employer was the head of a crime syndicate. "Tell me about him," Dante said suddenly. Emily paused, fork halfway to her mouth. "Who?" "Your father. You carry his failure like a cross. Was he a good man?" Emily set her fork down slowly. He was stubborn. He thought he could fix everything himself. He used to make pancakes in the shape of animals for me when I was a kid, even when he was dead tired from the night shift. He loved that diner more than anything." Dante nodded slowly, swirling the red wine in the glass he had brought with him. Stubbornness is a common affliction among men who try to build something from nothing. "Did you know him well?" she asked, emboldened by the wine and the late hour. "When he came to borrow the money. I met him twice," Dante said. "He was desperate. I could smell the fear on him. Most men who come to me are greedy. Emily, they want to expand, to gamble, to conquer. Your father just wanted to survive. I respected that. That is why I gave him the loan when my advisors told me he was a bad risk." Emily looked at him, searching his face. The candlelight cast shadows across his sharp cheekbones, softening the harsh lines of his expression. "Do you enjoy it?" she asked softly. "What? Being feared?" "Walking into a room and watching everyone stop breathing." Dante leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table. He clasped his hands together, his dark eyes boring into hers. "Fear is a tool," he said, his voice low. "It keeps order. It keeps the wolves at the door. But it is lonely. Emily." He paused, his gaze drifting to the window where the rain distorted the city lights into smears of neon. "You asked if I enjoy it. The answer is no. It is necessary. But power means nothing if you have no one you trust. If you have to watch your back every time you close your eyes, you do not own the city. The city owns you." The vulnerability in his words stunned her. It was a crack in the armor, a glimpse of the man beneath the monster. A sudden, violent crack of thunder shook the building, rattling the heavy glass of the windows. Emily flinched hard, her hand flying to her chest. She'd always hated storms. Without a word, Dante stood up. She thought he was leaving. Instead, he moved around the table and slid into the booth beside her. He did not touch her, but his presence was a sudden, overwhelming wall of heat. He was close enough that his shoulder brushed against her arm with every breath. His cologne, a rich mix of tobacco, leather, and rain, wrapped around her, drowning out the smell of the pasta. "Dante," she breathed, her heart beginning to gallop. "He's not going to hurt you," he said, misinterpreting her reaction, or perhaps choosing to ignore the tension spiking between them. "It is just noise." He rested his arm along the back of the booth behind her head. It was a protective gesture, sheltering. His other hand rested on the leather seat, inches from her thigh. It was not touching her, but she could feel the phantom weight of it, the potential of it. Emily turned her head to look at him. He was so close. She could see the individual lashes framing his eyes, the slight roughness of his skin. "Why did you really hire me?" she whispered. It was not just because of the housekeeper." Dante turned his head, his face inches from hers. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then back up to her eyes. The air in the booth became heavy, thick with static. "Because you looked at me," he said, his voice a rough murmur. "In that office, when you were weeping, you looked at me. Not at the boss, not at the money, at me." His hand on the seat moved, just a fraction, his pinky finger brushing against the fabric of her skirt. The contact sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. Emily started, but her voice failed her. She felt a pull, a magnetic drag toward him. She wanted to lean in. She wanted to bridge the tiny gap between them and find out if his mouth was as hard as his words or as gentle as his hands had been that first day. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The phone in Dante's pocket vibrated aggressively against the table leg. The spell shattered. Dante pulled back instantly, the warmth vanishing as he reached for the phone. He answered it, his voice shifting from intimate to icy in a split second. Moretti. Emily watched the transformation. The man who had been sitting beside her, vulnerable and close, was gone. The capo was back. When? Dante snapped into the phone. How many? He listened for a moment, his jaw tightening until the muscle ticked. Lock it down. Put a team on the perimeter. I am coming down. He hung up and stood, sliding his jacket back on in one fluid motion. What is it? Emily asked, fear spiking in her chest. We have a problem, Dante said, buttoning his jacket. A rival crew. The Portside gang, they've been spotted 2 blocks over. They are testing the boundaries. Portside? Emily repeated. The name felt familiar, though she did not know why. You are going home, Dante said, his tone brokering no argument. Now. He grabbed his radio from his belt. Carlo, bring the car around. We are moving. And put 2 men on Carter's apartment building. Heavy rotation. On my apartment. Emily stood up, her legs shaky. Dante, what is happening? Nothing that will touch you, he vowed, looking at her with a fierce intensity. But I am not taking chances. Get your coat. The drive back to her apartment was fast and tense. Dante spent the entire time on his phone, issuing orders in rapid-fire Italian and English. He was a general at war, organizing troops, securing assets. When they arrived at her building, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Dante dismissed the driver and walked her into the lobby, then into the elevator, and all the way to her door. The hallway was quiet, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Emily's hands were shaking as she dug into her purse for her keys. The adrenaline of the security alert mixed with the lingering sexual tension from the restaurant was making her clumsy. She dropped the keys. Dante reached down and scooped them up before they hit the carpet. Allow me, he said. He moved behind her. She could feel the heat of his chest against her back, not quite touching, but close enough that she instinctively leaned back into him. He reached over her shoulder, his arm brushing against her ear, and slotted the key into the lock with a steady hand. He turned it, the click echoing in the hallway. Emily turned around quickly, intending to thank him. She misjudged the distance. She bumped into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest to steady herself. They were inches apart. Dante's hand was still resting on the doorframe beside her head, effectively trapping her between his body and the wood. Emily looked up, her breath catching. Dante was looking down at her, his dark eyes hooded and unreadable. His other hand came up, hovering near her waist, fingers flexing as if he wanted to grab her but was forcing himself not to. Thank you, she whispered, her voice husky, for walking me up. Dante did not answer immediately. He leaned in closer, his head dipping down. His breath was warm against her forehead, smelling of mint and the wine they had shared. Emily's lips parted. She tilted her chin up, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It felt inevitable. The kiss was right there, suspended in the charged space between them. She wanted it. God help her, she wanted him to close the gap. Dante's gaze dropped to her lips. He stayed there for a long, tortured second, his body radiating a hunger that matched her own. Then, he closed his eyes briefly and exhaled a sharp breath. He stepped back. The loss of his proximity was physical, like a sudden drop in temperature. Dante looked at her, a restrained half-smile touching his lips. It was a sad smile. Get some sleep. Emily, he murmured, lock the deadbolt. He turned and walked away down the hall, his footsteps heavy and rhythmic. Emily stood in the doorway watching him go until he disappeared into the elevator. She stepped inside her apartment and locked the door, deadbolt, chain, and handle, just as he had ordered. She leaned her back against the door and slid down until she was sitting on the floor. She touched her lips, which still tingled with the ghost of a kiss that had never happened. Later, lying awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. Emily Carter fought a war within herself. On one side was the terrifying reality of her situation. She was working for a criminal. Her father's debts were tied to a shadow war between rival gangs. Men with guns were standing guard outside her building because she was now a target by association. On the other side was Dante, the man who had stopped his soldier from beating a drunk. The man who had fed her pasta in a dimly lit room. The man who had looked at her with such intense, restrained longing that it made her toes curl. She was drawn to him like a moth to a flame, even though she knew that flames did only one thing. They burned. The walls of Bella Nata had ears, and lately they were whispering a single name: Victor Cade. Emily Carter heard it first while she was counting inventory in the wine cellar. 2 of the line cooks were taking a smoke break just outside the delivery grate, their voices drifting in with the damp city air. They spoke of a turf war, of broken windows in the garment district, and of a man named Cade who was buying up debt like he was collecting baseball cards. She heard it again 2 days later, passing the security room in the basement. Marco, the soldier Dante had reprimanded, was arguing on the phone, his voice pitched low but furious. "He is squeezing the docks," Marco had hissed. "Cade is cutting off the supply chain. He wants the small businesses to fold so he can launder through the real estate." Emily had paused, her hand hovering over the door handle. Laundering through real estate. Squeezing small businesses? It sounded terrifyingly familiar. It sounded exactly like what had happened to the Blue Spoon. The realization sat in her stomach like a stone for the rest of the week. She went through the motions of her job, seating guests, balancing the nightly till, smiling at men in expensive suits, but her mind was elsewhere. She was trying to piece together a puzzle where half the pieces were hidden in shadow. On Thursday, her night off, Emily decided to finally unpack the last of the boxes she had hastily shoved into the closet of her new apartment. It was a task she had been avoiding. These were the boxes from her father's house, the things she had saved from the estate sale 2 years ago and never had the heart to look at since. She sat on the floor of the living room, a glass of cheap wine beside her, and cut the tape on a battered cardboard box labeled Dad Office inside. It smelled of old paper and the peppermint candies her father used to keep in his pockets. There were tax returns from the 90s, photos of her mother, and a stack of menus from the diner's grand opening. At the bottom of the box, tucked beneath a broken calculator, was a small, spiral-bound notebook. Emily recognized it immediately. Her father used to carry it everywhere, scribbling down recipe ideas, grocery lists, and daily takings. She opened it, her fingers tracing the familiar, looping handwriting. The first few pages were mundane, orders for eggs, reminders to call the plumber. But as she flipped toward the end, the entries changed. The handwriting became jagged, rushed. The lists of ingredients were replaced by lists of numbers, payments. She saw dates from 3 years ago. Beside each date was a figure, $500, $1,000, $2,000, and beside the numbers were initials D.M. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Dante Moretti. She kept reading. The payments to D.M. were regular, consistent. But then, a new name appeared in the margins, written in red ink, circled so hard the pen had torn through the paper. Cade. The numbers next to Cade's name were erratic and much larger. 5,000, 8,000, and then a note scribbled in the footer of the page, the ink smeared as if by a trembling hand. Victor says double next week or he burns the kitchen. D.M. says hold firm. I do not know who to listen to. I am drowning. Emily stared at the words, the room spinning around her. Her father had not just borrowed from Dante. He had been caught in a vice between Dante Moretti and Victor Cade. He was being extorted by one while paying the other, and Dante had never told her. He had sat across from her in that office, handed her a handkerchief, and told her he respected her father. He had told her the debt was a simple business transaction. He had omitted the part where her father was being terrorized by a rival gang, a terror that Dante was apparently aware of. DM. Says hold firm. Dante knew. He knew her father was in danger, and he had told him to hold his ground. Had he used her father as a pawn, a buffer zone in his war with Cade? The grief that had been a dull ache for 2 years suddenly sharpened into a blade of pure, hot anger. She felt betrayed. She felt used. She had let Dante Moretti drive her home, feed her, and employ her, thinking he was the lesser of two evils. But what if he was just the shark that swam closer to the boat? Emily grabbed the notebook and stood up. She did not bother to put on a coat, though the night air was chill. She grabbed her keys, marched out of the apartment, and hailed a cab. Bella Knott was closed for the night, but the lights in the upstairs office were still on. Emily knew the code to the staff entrance now. She punched it in, ignored the surprised look of the janitor buffing the hallway floor, and stormed up the stairs. She did not knock. She threw the heavy oak door open. It banged against the wall with a sound like a gunshot. Dante was standing by the window, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand, looking out at the city. He spun around, his hand flying to the inside of his jacket before he recognized her. "Emily?" he asked, his voice rough with surprise. "What are you doing here? It is 2 a.m. Emily marched across the Persian rug and slammed the notebook down on his pristine mahogany desk. "You lied to me," she said. Her voice was shaking, not with fear, but with a rage so potent it made her vision blur. Dante looked at the notebook, then up at her face. He did not move toward the desk. He stayed by the window, his expression guarding itself instantly. "I have never lied to you, Emily." "Omission is a lie," she shouted. "You told me my father borrowed money. You told me you respected him. You did not tell me he was being hunted by a man named Cade and that you were the one telling him to stand his ground." Dante's eyes narrowed. He set his glass down on the windowsill with a sharp clink. "Where did you get that? It does not matter where I got it. Read it." She jabbed a finger at the open page. He wrote it down. "Dante, Victor says double or he burns the kitchen. And you told him to hold firm. You used him. You used a 60-year-old man who made pancakes for a living as a shield against your enemy." Dante walked over to the desk. He looked down at the notebook. He did not need to read it. Emily could see in his face that he knew exactly what the pages contained. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of profound exhaustion she had never seen from him before. "It is not that simple," he said quietly. "It looks pretty simple to me," Emily retorted, tears stinging her eyes. "Two monsters fighting over a scrap of meat. My father was the meat. And now I am just the leftovers you decided to scoop up." "Stop," Dante warned, his voice dropping an octave. "No, I will not stop. Did you know when he died? Did you know Victor Cade had his claws in him?" "Yes," Dante said. The word hung in the air, heavy and damning. Emily felt like she had been slapped. "You knew. And you did nothing." "I tried to stop it," Dante snapped, his control finally fraying. He moved around the desk, his presence suddenly looming large in the room. "You think I wanted him to suffer? I offered him protection. I told him to let me put men in the diner. I told him to refuse Cade's payments so I could have a reason to strike back without starting a citywide war. But he was scared," Emily cried. "He was a diner owner, not a soldier. He hid how bad it was because he was terrified." "I know," Dante roared back, the sound echoing off the walls. "I know he hid it. That is why I could not save him." The silence that followed his shout was ringing and absolute. Emily stood frozen, her chest heaving. Dante was breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The mask of the cool, collected Mafia Don was gone. In its place was a man who looked haunted. Dante turned away from her, pacing a short, sharp line in front of the window. "I told him to hold firm because if he paid Cade, he would never stop paying," he said, his voice lower now, thick with regret. "I told him I would handle it. But your father, he was proud. He stopped coming to me. He stopped answering my calls. By the time I realized Cade had seized the deed through that shell company, your father was already in the hospital with the heart attack that killed him. He stopped pacing and looked at her. His dark eyes were filled with a raw, bleeding honesty. If I had watched closer, maybe he would still be alive. I carry that. Every single day. I carry that. Emily stared at him. The anger was still there, churning in her gut, but it was now mixed with a confusing wash of grief and understanding. He was guilty, yes, but he was not the villain she had painted him to be in the cab ride over. He was a man who had failed, not a man who had feasted. "You still should have told me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You let me walk in here, let me work for you, and you never said his name." "I wanted to keep you out of it," Dante said, stepping closer. "I wanted you to pay your debt and leave. I did not want you to know that there are wolves like Victor Cade in this city who would eat you alive just to send a message to me." "Your world is poison," Emily said, shaking her head. "It touches everything and ruins it. My father, the diner, me." "You are not ruined," Dante said fiercely. "I am. Look at me. Dante, I am laundering money for a mob boss to pay off a debt that should not exist, living in an apartment paid for with blood money. And I am standing here." She choked on the words. "Standing here doing what, Emily? Standing here wanting to believe you." She confessed, the admission tearing out of her throat. "I want to believe you are different." "But you are just a man in a suit with a gun." Dante's jaw tightened. "Perhaps you are right. Perhaps I am exactly what you say." He turned as if to dismiss her, to end the conversation and retreat back into his cold fortress. The dismissal ignited something volatile in Emily. She was tired of being dismissed. She was tired of men making decisions for her and then turning their backs. "Don't you turn away from me," she shouted. She lunged forward and shoved him. It was a futile gesture. He was over 6 feet of solid muscle, and she was barely 5'5". But the force of her frustration, the sheer emotional weight of the shove, made him stumble back a step. She went to shove him again, to hit his chest, to make him feel the physical impact of the pain she was carrying. Dante caught her wrists. His grip was lightning fast and unbreakable. He stopped her hands inches from his chest, holding them suspended in the air. "Enough," he growled. They stood there, chest to chest, the air between them crackling with a high-voltage tension. Emily pulled against his grip, but he did not let go. She looked up at him, her eyes blazing with fury and tears. "Let me go," she hissed. "No," Dante said. His breathing was harsh, matching her own uneven rhythm. He looked down at her, and the anger in his eyes began to shift. It did not disappear, but it transmuted, changing from the cold fire of aggression into something hotter, darker, and infinitely more dangerous. He looked at her flushed face, her parted lips, the fire in her eyes that mirrored his own. Emily stopped struggling. She felt the heat of his hands on her wrists, the warmth of his body radiating through his shirt. The space between them seemed to vanish, sucked away by the gravity of the moment. "Dante," she breathed. It was half a warning, half a plea. He loosened his fingers around her wrists, but he did not release her. Instead, his hand slid up her forearms, slow and deliberate, tracing the line of her trembling muscles. "You called my world poison," he whispered, his voice a rough rasp that sent a shiver straight down her spine. "You should run, Emily. You should run out that door and never look back." "I can't," she whispered back. "Why?" "Because I have nowhere else to go." Dante's eyes dropped to her mouth, the restraint he had shown in the apartment hallway, the discipline he had wielded like a weapon against the drunk. It snapped. "Emily." He groaned. She surged up on her toes. He met her halfway. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision. It was fierce, desperate, and tasted of whiskey and salt. It was the physical manifestation of all the anger, fear, and confusion that had been building between them for weeks. Emily freed her hands and fisted them in the front of his dress shirt, pulling him closer, anchoring herself to him. She felt the solid, unyielding heat of his chest against hers. He made a low sound in his throat, a growl of approval and hunger, and his arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her slightly off the floor to crush her against him. It was messy and unchoreographed. Their mouths moved together in a hungry rhythm, teeth clashing, breath mingling. It was the kind of kiss that destroyed things, boundaries, rules, logic. Dante's hands were everywhere. One moment they were at her waist, the next one was tangled in her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the angle. His lips left her mouth, trailing a hot, wet path along her jawline. Emily gasped, her head falling back, exposing her throat. She felt his stubble graze her sensitive skin, the sensation rough and electrifying. He kissed the hollow just beneath her ear, a sensitive spot that made her knees buckle. If he had not been holding her up, she would have slid to the floor. Her hands moved from his shirt to his neck, her fingers tracing the strong chords of muscle, feeling the frantic hammering of his pulse. He was not calm. He was not the stoic Don. He was a man on fire, and she was the spark, for a minute, maybe two. The world outside the office ceased to exist. There was no debt, no Cade, no ruined diner. There was only the smell of sandalwood and the overwhelming, terrifying feeling of belonging in his arms. Then, Dante stopped. He froze, his forehead resting against hers, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His hands were still gripping her waist, but the movement had ceased. He closed his eyes, his entire body trembling with the effort of stopping. "No," he muttered, his voice sounding wrecked. "No." Emily blinked, her eyes fluttering open. She was dazed, her lips swollen and tingling. "What?" Dante pulled back. He put a foot of distance between them, though his hands lingered on her arms for a second longer before dropping to his sides. He looked at her, and his eyes were black with desire, but also with a profound, aching regret. "I cannot do this," he said. Emily felt the cold air rush into the space between them. "Why?" she asked, her voice breathless. "Because if I take you, Emily, if we do this, I will never let you go." He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting the perfect style. "And I do not want to destroy you. I do not want to drag you deeper into this filth. You deserve better than a man who has to check his car for bombs every morning." Emily stood there, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the scar on his chin, the weariness in his posture, the genuine fear in his eyes, not fear for himself, but fear for her. She reached up and touched her lips, which still burned from his kiss. "It is too late, Dante," she whispered. He looked at her sharply. "What do you mean? You think you are protecting me by stopping?" she asked, a sad smile touching her lips. "I am already in it. I am in your ledgers. I am in your apartment. And now," she gestured vaguely to the space between them, "I am in this, whether I want to be or not." Dante looked at her with a mixture of agony and longing. He took a step toward her, his hand reaching out, but then he curled his fingers into a fist and dropped his arm. "Go home, Emily," he rasped. "Please, before I change my mind." Emily hesitated. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to close the gap again, to finish what they had started, but she saw the resolve in his face and the fragility of it. If she pushed him now, he would break, and she did not know if either of them could survive the fallout. "Okay," she whispered. She stepped back. Retrieving her purse from the floor where she had dropped it, she looked at the notebook still sitting on his desk. "Keep it," she said. "I do not want to see it again." She turned and walked to the door. Her legs felt heavy, her body aching with unspent adrenaline and desire. She paused at the threshold and looked back. Dante was standing exactly where she had left him, alone in the center of the office, his chest heaving, watching her leave. He looked like a king in a crumbling castle, powerful and utterly isolated. "I need to think," she muttered, more to herself than to him. She walked out and closed the heavy door behind her, shutting off the light and the man. The rain had started again by the time Emily reached her apartment building. It was a light, miserable drizzle that slicked the streets of Greyhaven. She paid the cab driver and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the cold rain cool her flushed face. She looked up at the 10th floor, at the dark windows of the apartment Dante had given her. She felt unmoored. The anger she had felt earlier was gone. replaced by a terrifying clarity. She was falling in love with Dante Moretti, and that love was likely to get her killed. She turned and walked toward the lobby entrance, wrapping her coat tighter around herself. She did not see the car parked across the street, tucked into the shadows of an alleyway. It was a nondescript gray sedan, the kind that blended into the city grayness. Inside, a figure watched her through the rain-streaked windshield. The glow of a cigarette illuminated a scarred hand holding a cell phone. "Yeah, I have eyes on her," the man said into the phone. "She just got dropped off. Looks like she had a rough night." He took a drag of the cigarette, his eyes narrowing as Emily disappeared into the building. "She is living in one of Moretti's safe houses, the high-rise on 4th. Yeah, the bookkeeper." The man smiled, a cold, predatory expression that did not reach his eyes. "Victor is going to be pleased. Moretti keeps his business tight, but he is sloppy with his strays. I think the little bookkeeper might be exactly the way in we have been looking for." He hung up the phone and started the engine, the car purring to life like a hunting cat. The game had changed, and Emily Carter was no longer just a spectator. She was the prize. The plastic handles of the grocery bags dug into Emily Carter's palms, a grounding sensation that felt oddly comforting against the damp chill of the evening. She had bought simple things: coffee, eggs, a loaf of bread, attempts to normalize a life that had spun wildly out of control. The street near her new apartment building was quiet, the streetlights humming overhead, casting long, distorted shadows on the wet pavement. She was 10 feet from the lobby entrance when the illusion of safety shattered. A gray van screeched to a halt at the curb, the tires kicking up a spray of dirty water. Before Emily could react, the side door slid open with a violent rattle. 2 men jumped out. She recognized them instantly from the dossiers Dante had left open on his desk. Portside soldiers, the ones with the neck tattoos. Emily dropped the groceries. Eggs cracked against the concrete, the sound lost under the scuffle of boots. She turned to run, but a heavy hand clamped over her mouth, dragging her backward. She kicked out, her heel connecting with a shin. But the second man grabbed her legs, lifting her effortlessly off the ground. "Stop struggling," one of them hissed in her ear. They threw her into the back of the van onto a metal floor that smelled of gasoline and old sweat. The door slammed shut, cutting off the streetlights. Darkness swallowed her. Before she could scream, a rough burlap sack was pulled over her head, blinding her. Rough hands bound her wrists with zip ties, the plastic biting into her skin. "Sit still," a voice sneered from the front seat. "Victor wants to meet the girl who makes Moretti so weak." The engine roared to life, and the van surged forward, throwing Emily against the cold metal wall. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Makes Moretti weak." The words echoed in the darkness, a terrifying confirmation of the very thing Dante had feared. At Bella Notte, the silence in the private office was heavier than lead. Dante Moretti stared at the tracking dot on the computer's screen. It was gray. It had been gray for 12 minutes. "Where is she?" Dante asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried a vibration that made the 2 security specialists in the room flinch. "Her phone is off the grid, boss," one of the men said, typing furiously. "Last signal was near the apartment. We sent a unit. They found groceries on the sidewalk. No sign of Miss Carter." Dante stood up. The movement was sharp, violent. He grabbed his heavy wool coat from the rack and threw it on. His jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked visibly in his cheek. The calm, calculated demeanor he wore like armor was gone. In its place was a raw, terrified fury. "Find the van," Dante barked, striding toward the door. "Pull every camera feed within a 5-block radius. I want a make and model in 5 minutes. And get the car." He did not wait for an answer. He stormed out of the office, his mind racing. He had tried to push her away. He had tried to keep her safe by keeping his distance, and it had failed. The warehouse was freezing. The air tasted of salt and rotting fish, suggesting they were near the docks. Emily was shoved into a wooden chair. Her wrists retied behind the backrest, the hood was ripped from her head, and she blinked against the sudden assault of a dangling, naked bulb swaying above her. She was in a cavernous space, shadows stretching into the corners. Crates were stacked high against the walls. In front of her stood a man she had only heard about in whispers. Victor Cade was tall, with a lean, predatory build and eyes that looked like chips of ice. He wore a long leather coat that looked expensive but neglected. He circled her slowly, his boots crunching on the grimy concrete floor. "So this is the bookkeeper," Victor said, his voice smooth and mocking. "Pretty. I can see why Dante likes you. He always did have a soft spot for strays." "Where is he?" Emily demanded, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Oh, he's coming," Victor said, stopping in front of her. "He's tearing the city apart right now. It is quite romantic. Really, but while we wait, I thought we should have a chat about finances." He pulled a tablet from his coat pocket and tapped the screen, turning it toward her. "Do you recognize him?" Emily looked at the grainy photo on the screen. It was taken from a distance, showing two men sitting at a park bench. One was a heavy-set man she recognized as Marco Leone, the accountant at Bellinati. The other man was Ryan. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. Ryan, her ex-fiancé, the man who had disappeared with her savings. He looked thinner in the photo, nervous, but it was undeniably him. "Ryan," she whispered. "Your fiancé was very helpful to us," Victor said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "He was not just bad with money. Emily, he was greedy. He helped us set up the shell company that swallowed your father's diner, and then he introduced us to Marco." Victor swiped to the next photo. It showed Marco handing Ryan a thick envelope. "Marco has been feeding us Dante's shipping routes for 6 months," Victor explained, enjoying the horror on her face. "In exchange, we let Marco skim off the top. Your father was just collateral damage. Ryan sold him out to get a cut of the profits." Emily felt sick. The betrayal was a physical blow to her gut. It was not just bad luck. It was not just the economy. It was Ryan. The man she had slept beside for 3 years had systematically dismantled her life for money. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because you are going to help me finish it," Victor said, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. "You have access to Dante's private ledgers now. You know where he hides the real money. You are going to tell me exactly how to bleed him dry." "I will never help you," Emily spat. Victor straightened up, his expression hardening. "You will," he said coldly, "or people you care about will start disappearing. And I do not mean your boyfriend Dante. I mean that nice aunt of yours in Florida, or maybe a cousin. I can reach anyone." "Emily." Dante kicked the door to the basement office open. The wood splintered near the lock. Marco Leone looked up from his desk, his eyes widening in terror as he saw the look on Dante's face. "Boss?" Marco stammered. "What is—" Dante crossed the room in 2 strides. He grabbed Marco by the lapels of his jacket and slammed him against the concrete wall. The impact knocked the wind out of the accountant. Dante's knuckles were white, his breathing heavy and ragged. He held up his phone, showing the surveillance image his tech team had just scraped from a traffic camera near the docks, Marco's car meeting the gray van an hour before the abduction. "Where is she?" Dante roared, shaking the man. Marco's face turned pale. "I do not know what you are talking about." Dante slammed him against the wall again, harder this time. A picture frame fell from the shelf and shattered on the floor. "Do not lie to me, Marco. You gave them the route. You gave them Emily. Tell me where Cade took her, or I will take you apart piece by piece." Marco crumbled. He began to weep, holding his hands up in surrender. The old cannery. By Pier 9. They said they just wanted to talk to her. They said no one would get hurt. Dante released him with a shove of disgust. Marco slid down the wall, sobbing. Dante turned to Luca, who was standing in the doorway with a grim expression. "Tie him up," Dante ordered, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "Put him in the holding cell. If she has a single scratch on her—" Marco does not see the sun rise. Dante looked down at his own hand. His knuckles were bruised and bloodied from where he had punched the wall in the hallway on his way down. He flexed his fingers, ignoring the pain. The rage inside him was a living thing, a fire that threatened to consume everything in its path. War will not even begin to cover it, he growled to the empty room. He turned and marched toward the exit. Let us go. Pier 9, in the warehouse. Emily was fighting to keep her panic at bay. She forced herself to focus, to think like the manager she used to be, assess the situation, find a solution. Victor had stepped away to take a phone call, leaving her guarded by the two men from the van. Emily looked around the space, desperately trying to memorize details. Cracked windows on the north wall, 20 feet up, rusted metal stairs leading to a catwalk on the east side. A faded logo painted on the brick behind Victor. Atlantic Fishery Supply. If she got out of this, if she survived, Dante would need to know these things. Victor returned, slipping his phone into his pocket. Time is up. Emily, he said, Dante is on his way. My lookout spotted his cars. He pulled a silver pistol from his holster and checked the chamber. We are going to make a trade, his empire for your life. Let us hope he thinks you are worth it. Emily's heart hammered. He is coming. The rain masked the sound of their approach. Dante signaled for his men to cut the engines 2 blocks away, and he did not bring an army. He brought 5 men, his best. A large assault would spook Cade, and a spooked man with a gun was a liability Dante could not afford. He moved through the shadows of the shipping containers, his black coat blending into the night. He held a heavy, semi-automatic pistol at his side. His face was a mask of deadly concentration, but inside, his chest felt hollowed out by fear. They reached the side entrance of the cannery. Dante nodded to Luca, who silently picked the lock. They slipped inside. The warehouse was vast, filled with the sound of wind whistling through broken glass. Dante moved behind a stack of pallets, his eyes scanning the floor. He saw her. Emily was tied to a chair in the center of the room, directly under the light. She looked pale, her hair messy, a bruise forming on her cheekbone. The sight of the bruise made Dante's vision swim with red. Victor Cade stood behind her, as if sensing Dante's presence. Victor pressed the barrel of his gun against Emily's temple. "Come out, Dante!" Victor shouted, his voice echoing off the metal roof. "I know you are here." Dante signaled his men to hold their positions. He took a deep breath, holstered his weapon slowly so Victor could see his hands, and stepped out from behind the pallets. "Let her go." "Victor," Dante said. His voice was steady, calm, cutting through the cavernous space. Victor laughed. He tightened his grip on Emily's shoulder. She flinched, her eyes locking onto Dante's. He saw terror there, but also relief. "Look at you," Victor sneered. "The king of Greyhaven, risking everything for a broke little waitress. You are pathetic." "She is not a waitress," Dante said, taking a slow step forward. "And she has nothing to do with this. This is between you and me. It is all connected." "Dante," Victor said, "you took the territory I wanted. You blocked my shipments. Now I take what you want." Dante held his hands up, palms open. He inched closer, his movements fluid and non-threatening. "You want the territory? Take it. You want the shipping lanes? Sign the papers. I will give you the keys to the kingdom. Victor, just walk away from her." Emily gasped. "No, Dante, do not do it. Quiet," Victor snapped, pressing the gun harder against her skin. He looked at Dante, eyes narrowing. "You would give it all up? For her?" Dante did not hesitate. "Yes." For a second, Victor looked stunned. The sheer magnitude of the offer threw him off balance. He glanced toward his men. A moment of distraction. "Now!" Dante shouted. High above on the catwalk, one of Dante's sharpshooters shot out the hanging light bulb. The warehouse plunged into semi-darkness. In the confusion, Emily reacted on pure instinct. She threw her weight backward and stomped her heel down onto Victor's instep with all the force she could muster. Victor howled in pain. His hand jerked, and the gun went off. Bang! The bullet flew wildly into the ceiling. Dante was already moving. He launched himself forward, tackling Victor around the waist. The two men crashed to the concrete floor in a tangle of limbs. Gunfire erupted from the shadows as Dante's men engaged Victor's guards. "Emily, get down!" Dante roared, rolling away from Victor and scrambling toward her. He pulled a knife from his boot and slashed the ropes binding her wrists. Emily fell forward, her legs numb. Dante caught her. He grabbed her around the waist and dragged her behind a stack of heavy wooden crates, just as a hail of bullets chipped away the concrete where she had been sitting. "Stay down," Dante commanded, pressing her into the dusty floor. He covered her body with his own, his heavy coat acting as a shield. He wrapped his arms around her, locking her against his chest. Emily was shaking violently, her hands clutching his shirt. "Dante," she sobbed, burying her face in his neck. "I have you," he whispered fiercely into her hair. "I have you, not while I breathe. Emily, I told you." He raised his head, firing 2 shots over the top of the crate to suppress the enemy, then ducked back down to shield her again. "We have to move!" he shouted over the noise of the firefight. He looked at her, his face streaked with grime, his eyes wild with adrenaline and desperate love. "Trust me?" he asked. Emily looked at the man who had just offered to burn his empire to the ground to save her life. "Yes," she whispered. "Then run when I say run." Dante kissed her forehead, a hard, quick seal of a promise, and turned back to the chaos, pulling her with him into the line of fire. The tires of the armored SUV crunched over the gravel driveway, breaking the heavy silence of the night. The safe house was a sprawling, single-story estate tucked deep into the wooded hills on the outskirts of Greyhaven, miles away from the smoke and sirens of the docks. It was a place that did not exist on any map, a ghost structure built for moments when the world burned down. Dante Moretti killed the engine. For a long moment, neither he nor Emily moved. The adrenaline that had sustained them through the shootout and the frantic escape was beginning to drain away, leaving behind a cold, shaking exhaustion. "We are safe here," Dante said, his voice rough. He got out and walked around to the passenger side, opening the door for her. Emily stepped out, her legs feeling like water. The air here was clean, smelling of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of blood and gunpowder that still clung to her clothes. Dante guided her toward the front door, his hand hovering at the small of her back without touching her, as if he were afraid she might shatter if he applied too much pressure. His men had stayed at the perimeter, securing the grounds inside. The house was dark and still. Dante locked the heavy oak door behind them, throwing 3 separate deadbolts. He turned to face her, running a hand through his hair, which was matted with dust. "Victor got away," Dante said, the admission tasting like bile. He took a bullet to the shoulder, but his driver pulled him out. "However, we have 3 of his lieutenants in custody. The police arrived just as we left. Portside is crippled." He was trying to reassure her, to give her a tactical summary that proved they had won. But Emily was not listening to the strategy. She was staring at the blood on his shirt, some of it his, some of it from the man he had knifed to cut her bonds. She looked at him, and the numbness that had protected her since the warehouse suddenly evaporated. In its place came a tidal wave of terror and fury so acute it robbed her of breath. "You almost got me killed," she whispered. Dante stiffened. "I know, they put a bag over my head." "Dante," she cried out, her voice rising, cracking with the strain. "They tied me to a chair. I could smell the gun oil. I could feel the cold metal against my skin." "I know." "Emily," Dante said, stepping toward her. "Don't," she screamed, stepping back. "Do not come near me, your world. This poison, it almost ended me tonight. I am a hotel manager. I balance books. I do not get tied up in warehouses." She was shaking violently now, tears streaming down her soot-stained cheeks. The terror was a physical thing, clawing at her throat. "I can't breathe," she gasped, clutching at her chest. "I can't breathe from the fear anymore. Dante, it is everywhere." She lunged at him, her fists flying out. She struck his chest, a frantic, thudding blow that had no real power behind it. She hit him again, and again, her fists bouncing off the solid wall of his torso. "I hate this," she sobbed, hitting him. "I hate you for dragging me into this. I hate that I am so scared." Dante did not flinch. He did not block her blows. He stood like a statue, letting her pour all her terror and rage into him. He took every strike, his face etched with a profound, aching sorrow. As her energy waned, the punches turned into weak shoves, and then her hands simply uncurled, gripping the fabric of his ruined shirt as her legs gave out. Dante caught her. He pulled her into a tight embrace, wrapping his arms around her shuddering frame. He crushed her against him, burying his face in her hair. "I have you," he murmured, his voice thick. "I have you." Emily collapsed against him, sobbing into his shoulder, her hands clutching the back of his coat as if he were the only solid thing left in the universe. "I am sorry," Dante whispered, his hand moving slowly up and down her back, his fingers splayed to cover as much of her as possible, grounding her. "I'm so sorry. I should have protected you better. I never meant for you to become a target. I thought I could keep the two worlds separate. I was arrogant, and I almost lost you because of it." He held her while she cried, rocking her slightly, absorbing her pain until the sobs turned into quiet, hitching breaths. An hour later, the safe house was silent. Save for the distant, muted sounds of Dante's men moving on the porch outside, they sat on the edge of the bed in the master bedroom. The only light came from a small lamp on the bedside table, casting long, soft shadows across the room. Dante had discarded his coat and his shoulder holster, but he was still wearing the blood-stained dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal his bruised forearms. Emily had washed her face, but her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. She sat with her hands clasped between her knees, staring at the floor. Dante sat a few feet away, watching her. He looked older tonight. The lines around his eyes were deeper, and the burden of command seemed to weigh heavily on his shoulders. "We cannot stay here forever," Emily said quietly. "No," Dante agreed. "A few days, until the heat dies down." "And then what?" she asked, looking up at him. "We go back. I wait for the next van? For the next Victor?" Dante looked away, his jaw tightening. "I will double the guard. I will put you on a plane if you want. Somewhere far away. Europe. Asia. Anywhere Cade cannot reach. I do not want to run." "Dante," she said, her voice gaining a sudden, sharp edge, "and I am tired of being powerless. I am tired of waiting for men to decide if I live or die." She turned her body toward him. "I want a plan, a real plan, not just hiding in a house in the woods." Dante looked at her, surprised by the steel in her tone. He hesitated, debating how much to tell her. He had tried to shield her from the truth before, and it had nearly gotten her killed. "It is not just Cade," he admitted, his voice low. "What do you mean?" Dante leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Marco, the accountant. Before I found you, I squeezed him. He did not just sell us out to Portside. He was feeding information to a network. Victor Cade is moving with confidence because he has insulation. He has city officials on his payroll. He has police captains looking the other way." Emily felt a cold chill. "That is why the police did not raid the warehouse until after the shooting started." "Exactly," Dante said grimly. "Victor is not just a gangster. He's a partner to the people who run this city. If I kill him, the law comes down on me with the full force of the state. If I do nothing, he kills me. It is a trap." "So we are trapped," Emily whispered. Dante looked at his hands. "I am trapped. You can still get out." Emily reached out and touched his forearm. Her fingers brushed against a long, jagged scar that ran from his wrist to his elbow, the tissue white and raised against his tan skin. "Where did this come from?" she asked softly. Dante looked down at the scar. He did not pull away. "It was 8 years ago," he said, his voice distant. "An ambush, not unlike tonight. We were moving cash. We got boxed in by a crew from the south side." He paused, and the silence in the room grew heavy. "My brother, Leo, was with me. He was 22. He had just finished university. He was not supposed to be in the life, but he wanted to help me for one summer." Dante swallowed hard. "They came at us with knives. They wanted to make it quiet. I took this cut defending him, but there were too many of them." He looked up at Emily, his eyes dark with buried grief. "I killed the men who did it, but I could not save Leo. He died in the car on the way to the doctor. That is why I built this empire. Emily, not for money, but to make sure that no one could ever touch my family again. And today I realized I have failed. I have all this power, and I still could not keep you safe." The raw honesty of his confession hung in the air. He was not a monster. He was a man built out of grief, trying to build a fortress large enough to keep out the pain. Emily moved her hand from his arm to his face. She cupped his cheek, her thumbs brushing against the rough stubble of his jawline. "You saved me," she whispered. "You came for me." Dante turned his face into her palm, closing his eyes. He leaned into her touch, starving for it. "I would burn the city down for you," he murmured. He opened his eyes. They were dark, intense, and filled with a hunger that had nothing to do with violence. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, to retreat to her side of the bed. She did not pull away. She leaned forward. Their lips met. It started tenderly, a soft, tentative exploration of shared relief. But the moment their mouths touched, the dam broke. The fear of the last few hours transmuted into a desperate need to feel, to connect, to prove they were both still alive. Dante groaned low in his throat. His hand came up to cup the back of her head, his fingers threading through her hair. The kiss deepened, becoming passionate and lingering. He tasted of coffee and sorrow. She tasted of tears and resilience. They fell back onto the bed, their bodies pressing close together. They were still fully clothed, the layers of denim and cotton acting as a friction that only heightened the sensation. Dante shifted, his weight settling over her, not crushing, but encompassing. His hand slid along her waist, moving to the small of her back, drawing her hips flush against his. Emily gasped into his mouth, her arms winding around his neck, pulling him down. She needed his weight. She needed the solid, undeniable reality of him. Their mouths moved with growing urgency, breaths mingling, heartbeats pounding in a synchronized rhythm against their chests. The room seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them, suspended in a bubble of heat and desire. Dante's hand moved up her side, his thumb grazing the underside of her breast. The intimacy was electric, a live wire snapping between them. For a moment, Emily forgot the danger. She forgot Victor Cade. She only knew that she wanted this man, wanted to be closer to him than physics allowed. But then, Dante pulled back. He tore his mouth from hers, breathing hard, his forehead resting against her temple. His body was tense, vibrating with the effort of restraint. "Emily," he rasped. He pushed himself up slightly, looking down at her. His pupils were blown wide, swallowing the iris. "I want this," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I want you more than I have ever wanted anything, but not like this. Not here, not while you are afraid and running for your life." He brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead, his touch impossibly gentle. "I want more than stolen moments in safe houses. Emily, I will not take anything from you tonight that you might regret in the morning light." Emily looked up at him, her chest heaving. She saw the respect in his eyes, the refusal to exploit her vulnerability. She reached up and traced the line of his bottom lip with her thumb. "The only thing I regret," she whispered, her voice steady and sure, "is not meeting you sooner." Dante closed his eyes as if her words were a physical caress. He lowered his head and kissed her once more, soft, reverent, a promise sealed in silence. Then he rolled onto his back beside her, pulling her into his side. They lay there in the dark, fully clothed, holding on to each other as the adrenaline finally faded into sleep. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the heavy curtains, painting stripes of dust motes in the air. Dante was already gone from the bed, his side of the mattress cool. Emily sat up. The events of the previous night rushed back to her, but the panic was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. She was done being the victim. She was done being the leverage. She heard Dante's voice in the living room, talking low on the phone. He was distracted. He was planning a war. Emily moved quickly. She went to the small travel bag Dante had brought from the office. Inside, she found the tablet he had used to show her the accounts weeks ago. She knew the passcode. He had typed it in front of her a dozen times. She unlocked it. Her fingers flew across the screen, locating the files on Marco Leone, the dual books, the payoffs, the shipping routes. She pulled her father's battered notebook from her own coat pocket, where she had instinctively shoved it before leaving the apartment the day she was taken. She took photos of the relevant pages in the notebook, the ones linking Cade to the extortion, and uploaded them to a secure cloud drive along with Marco's files. She needed an ally, not a gangster, not a soldier. She needed the law, but not the corrupt law that Victor owned. She remembered a name from the news, Detective Sarah Halloway. She was Internal Affairs, a woman who had made headlines last month for arresting a corrupt precinct captain. The papers called her a crusader. The streets called her untouchable. Emily found the number for the Internal Affairs tip line. She did not call from the house phone. She used an encrypted messaging app on the tablet. She typed a message. I have proof of the Cade corruption ring. I have the ledger connecting him to City Hall. I am willing to turn it over. But I have conditions. She hit send. 10 minutes later. A reply pinged back. Who is this? Emily typed, someone who wants to end the war. Meet me at the St. Jude Cathedral. 1 hour, come alone or the deal is off. She deleted the messages, wiped the browser history, and put the tablet back. She walked out into the living room. Dante was standing by the fireplace. Drinking coffee, he looked up, his expression softening instantly when he saw her. Good morning, he said. Good morning, Emily replied. She forced a smile. I'm going to take a shower. Then I think I'm ready to talk about the future. Take your time, Dante said. You are safe here. Emily nodded and turned away. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She was about to betray him to save him. An hour later, under the pretense of needing fresh air in the garden, Emily slipped through a gap in the back fence that she had spotted from the bedroom window. She walked a mile through the woods to the main road and hailed a passing taxi. The St. Jude Cathedral was a massive stone structure in the center of Greyhaven, neutral ground. It was empty at this time of day, save for a few elderly women lighting candles. Emily sat in a pew near the back. 5 minutes later, a woman in a trench coat slid into the pew behind her. She did not look like a cop. She looked like a tired schoolteacher. Emily Carter, the woman whispered. Detective Halloway, Emily said, not turning around. You said you have proof. Halloway said. I have Marco Leone's financial records. Emily whispered. I have shipping manifests. I have a notebook that details the extortion racket Victor Cade has been running on small businesses for 5 years. It connects him to the zoning commissioner and the precinct captain in the 3rd district. Halloway let out a low whistle. That is enough to bury them. All of them. I will give it to you, Emily said, clutching her hands in her lap. But I want a deal. For you? No, Emily said. For Dante Moretti. Halloway was silent for a moment. Moretti is a crime boss. Miss Carter, we do not cut deals with capos. You do if you want the bigger fish, Emily insisted. Victor Cade is the rot in this city. He owns the people who are supposed to be stopping him. Dante is a criminal, yes, but he keeps his violence in the shadows. Victor brings it to the streets. What do you want? Halloway asked. Immunity is off the table. I know that, Emily said, her voice steady, but I want a plea arrangement. He cooperates. He helps you dismantle the corruption. He steps down from the organization. In exchange, you give him a sentence that has an end date. You do not bury him in a hole for the rest of his life. And if he refuses? Halloway asked. He won't, Emily said, closing her eyes, because I am going to be the one testifying against him if he does not take it. There was a long silence in the dim cathedral. If the evidence is as good as you say, Halloway finally said, I can talk to the We can look at a reduced sentence for cooperation. Racketeering instead of murder 1. 5 years, maybe 7 with parole. But he has to give us everything. He will. Emily promised. She reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive containing the files. She slid it along the wooden pew. Bring down Victor, Emily said, and make sure Dante gets the offer before you put the cuffs on him. Halloway took the drive. You are a brave woman. Miss Carter, or a foolish one? Maybe both, Emily whispered. She stood up and walked out of the church, back into the rain to go tell the man she loved that she had just arranged for his arrest. The drive back to the safe house felt longer than the flight from the warehouse had the night before. The silence in the taxi was heavy, filled only by the rhythmic thumping of windshield wipers against the glass. Emily Carter, sat in the back seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her thumb tracing the cool metal of her phone. She had just set a trap for the man she loved. When she walked through the front door of the estate, the air inside was warm and smelled of coffee. Dante was sitting in the living room, reviewing a map spread out on the coffee table. He looked up as she entered, relief washing over his tired features. "You were gone a long time," he said, standing up. "I was about to send a team to find you." "I went to church," Emily said softly, hanging her coat by the door. "And then I met with Detective Halloway." Dante froze. The relief on his face vanished, replaced instantly by a mask of cold stone. He did not move, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You did what?" "I gave her Marco's ledgers," Emily said, her voice trembling but her chin held high. "And I gave her the proof of Victor's payroll." Dante stared at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. Then he exploded. He grabbed the map from the table and crumpled it, throwing it into the fireplace with a violent motion. He began to pace the room, his strides long and agitated, like a caged tiger realizing the lock has been turned. "Are you insane?" he roared, raking a hand through his hair. "You went to the police. You handed over evidence to the very people who want to bury me?" "I handed over evidence against Victor," Emily shouted back, stepping into the room. "It is the same thing." "Emily," Dante shouted, spinning around to face her. "You think Internal Affairs cares about the difference between me and Cade? To them, we're all just targets. You have gambled with both our lives." "I am saving our lives," Emily retorted. "You are naive," Dante snapped, his voice thick with fury. "You invited the law into a world that does not forgive. You think Halloway can protect you? When Victor finds out, he will not just come for me. He will burn everything down. He's already burning everything down." "Dante!" Emily screamed, her frustration boiling over. "We are hiding in the woods while he runs the city. I'm tired of waiting for the next bullet." She marched up to him, stopping only when she was chest to chest with him. "I refuse to live like this. I refuse to build a life on blood and fear. I will not spend the next 10 years looking over my shoulder, wondering if the car is going to explode when I turn the key. I want a future, a real one, even if it means walking away from you to get it." Dante stopped pacing. He looked down at her, his chest heaving. The anger in his eyes was still there, hot and volatile, but beneath it, something else was breaking. "You would walk away?" he asked, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "If the alternative is watching you die in a street war?" "Yes." Dante stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then the fight went out of him. His shoulders slumped, and he looked away, staring into the dying embers of the fire. "You think I'm angry because I am afraid of prison?" he asked quietly. "I do not know what you are afraid of," Emily admitted. "I am afraid of losing you," Dante confessed. He turned back to look at her, his expression raw and unguarded. "That is the only thing that terrifies me. The thought of you walking away. It scares me more than Cade. It scares me more than a life sentence." Emily felt tears prick her eyes. She reached out, taking his hand. His fingers were cold, but they curled around hers instantly. "I am in love with you, Dante," she whispered. Dante's eyes widened slightly, the breath hitching in his chest. "I love you," she repeated, the words feeling heavy and true. "But I will not let that love destroy what little future I have left. We cannot build a home on a battlefield. We have to clear the ground first." Dante looked at their joined hands. He was a man who had spent his life controlling every variable, manipulating every outcome. And now, this woman, this brave, stubborn hotel manager, had taken the wheel and steered them straight into the storm. He stepped closer, cupping her face with both hands. His palms were rough, calloused from years of violence, but his touch was impossibly gentle. His thumbs brushed away the tears that had started to spill down her cheeks. "You think you have lost everything," he murmured, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "You think you are empty. But as long as I am still breathing, I will fight to give you more than this. I will give you a life that does not need safe houses." He leaned his forehead against hers. "Okay," he whispered. "We do it your way, The morning of the operation was gray and heavy with impending rain. The plaza outside the Greyhaven County Courthouse was slick with drizzle, the stone steps shining like polished slate. Emily stood near the bottom of the steps, flanked by Detective Holloway and 4 uniformed officers. She wore a simple gray coat, her hands deep in her pockets to hide their trembling. Across the plaza, a black sedan pulled up. Dante Moretti stepped out. He was not in handcuffs. He was not being dragged. He walked toward them voluntarily, flanked by only 2 of his men, Luca and Carlo. He wore a crisp navy suit, his head held high. It was a signal to the city and to the underworld that he was not running. He was negotiating. Holloway spoke into her radio. "Target is on sight." "Secure the perimeter?" Dante stopped 10 feet from Emily. He looked at her, and for a brief second, a small, private smile touched his lips. It was a look of reassurance, a silent message that he was ready for whatever came next. "Detective," Dante said, nodding to Holloway, "I believe you have some paperwork for me. Mr. Moretti," Holloway said, stepping forward. "We appreciate your cooperation. If you will come with us—" The air shattered. Tires screeched from the side street. A heavy delivery truck smashed through the police barricades, sending officers scattering. The back doors of the truck flew open, and 4 men with automatic weapons opened fire. "Get down," Holloway screamed, shoving Emily toward a concrete pillar. Chaos erupted. Pedestrians screamed and ran. Police returned fire, the sound of gunshots echoing off the stone buildings like thunder. Dante did not run. He drew his own weapon, firing 2 precise shots that took down the lead gunman. But he was exposed. Dante! Emily screamed, trying to reach him. Someone grabbed her from behind, an arm made of iron locked around her throat, dragging her backward, cold metal pressed hard against her ribs. "Do not move," a voice snarled in her ear. It was Victor Cade. He had not sent his men to do the dirty work this time. He was here, desperate and cornered, knowing that the deal Emily had brokered was the end of his reign. "Stop firing or she dies," Victor bellowed, his voice cracking with manic rage. The shooting sputtered and died out as officers realized the situation. The silence that followed was terrifying, filled only with the sobbing of terrified civilians and the wail of distant sirens. Victor dragged Emily out from behind the pillar, using her body as a human shield. He stood in the center of the plaza, his gun dug deep into her side. "Drop it, Dante!" Victor shouted. "Drop it or I put a hole in her." Dante froze. He was 20 feet away, his gun raised. He looked at Emily, seeing the terror in her eyes, the way her feet scrambled for purchase on the wet pavement, slowly, deliberately. Dante opened his hand. His gun clattered to the ground. "Kick it away," Victor ordered. Dante kicked the weapon aside. He raised his hands, palms out. "Let her go." "Victor," Dante said, when his voice was steady, cutting through the rain. "This is over." "It is over when I say it is over," Victor spat. "You think you can cut a deal? You think you can walk away? I'm going to kill her, Dante, and then I'm going to kill you." Dante took a step forward. "Take me," he said. Victor laughed, a jagged, broken sound. You are already dead. I am offering you a trade," Dante said, taking another step. He ignored the warnings from Holloway, ignored his own men shouting at him to get back. He focused entirely on Victor. "You want the territory? It is yours. You want the roots? Take them. You want my life? Here it is." Dante stopped 10 feet away. He spread his arms wide, exposing his chest. "Let her go, and I will walk to you. You can put the bullet in me yourself. Just let her walk away." Emily felt Victor hesitate. The offer was everything he had ever wanted. Total victory. "No!" Emily screamed, struggling against Victor's grip. "Dante, no! Quiet!" Victor shouted, shaking her. Dante's eyes locked onto Emily's. They were filled with a profound, heartbreaking love. It was a goodbye. Emily felt a surge of panic so intense it nearly blinded her. She had lost her father. She had lost her home. She had lost her sense of self. She could not lose him. "I will not let you," she cried out, tears streaking her face, mixing with the rain. "I have lost everything already. Don't make me lose you." The sheer desperation in her voice echoed across the plaza. It was the sound of a woman who had nothing left to fear because the worst thing imaginable was standing right in front of her. Victor sneered. How touching. You can die together. He shifted his aim, moving the gun from Emily's ribs toward Dante in that split second of distraction as Victor's focus narrowed on his rival. Detective Holloway made her move. She was crouched behind a squad car to Victor's left. She signaled the sniper on the roof, "Take the shot." A sharp crack rang out. Victor jerked violently as a bullet tore through his right forearm. He screamed, dropping the gun. Emily did not wait. She threw herself to the ground, rolling away. Dante moved like lightning. He rushed forward, covering the 10 feet in a heartbeat. He did not go for Victor. He went for Emily. He grabbed her, pulling her into his arms and spinning her around, shielding her body with his own as police officers swarmed Victor, tackling him to the wet pavement. "Stay down," Dante commanded, pressing her face into his chest. He held her there, his arms locked around her like bands of steel, while the world exploded into shouting and handcuffs around them. Emily clung to his lapels, shaking uncontrollably, listening to the frantic beat of his heart against her ear. It was fast, alive, and strong. "It is over," he whispered into her hair. "It is done." The aftermath was a blur of statements, lawyers, and paperwork, but eventually, the chaos subsided. Victor Cade was in custody, facing charges that would put him away for 3 lifetimes. The corrupt officials he had paid off were being rounded up by Holloway's team. The rot was being cut out. Dante Moretti sat in a conference room in the courthouse. His lawyer had just finished reviewing the plea deal. It was heavy. He would have to dismantle the lending operations. He would have to turn over all assets related to the illegal gambling. And he would have to serve time, not a life sentence, but 5 years in a minimum security federal facility for racketeering charges, with eligibility for parole in 3. It was a prison sentence, but it was also a way out. Dante signed the papers. When he walked out of the courthouse, it was late afternoon. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and smelling of wet pavement and ozone. Emily was waiting for him at the bottom of the steps. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear. Dante walked down to her. He stopped a foot away. "They took my passport," he said, a small, wry smile playing on his lips. "And I have to report to the marshals on Monday." 3 years, Emily said softly. "Maybe less, if I am on my best behavior," Dante replied. He reached out and took her hand. "Are you going to wait?" he asked. He did not demand it. He asked it with the humility of a man who knew he had no right to expect it. Emily looked at him. She saw the man who had given her a handkerchief when she had nothing, the man who had fed her pasta, the man who had offered to die for her in the plaza. "I am not going anywhere," she said. "I have a restaurant to run. Someone has to make sure the books are balanced while you are gone." Dante laughed, a sound of genuine, unburdened joy. "You are keeping the job? It pays well," she said, smiling through her tears. "And the boss is cute." Dante stepped closer. He wrapped his coat around her shoulders, pulling her into him. "This is not the end," he murmured, resting his forehead against hers. "No," Emily whispered. "It is the beginning." "It is going to be hard," he warned. "I know," she said, "but it will be honest." Dante nodded. He cupped her chin and tilting her face up. "Thank you," he whispered, "for saving me." He lowered his head. They shared a slow, intense kiss on the courthouse steps. It was not a kiss born of adrenaline or fear. It was a kiss of choice, a promise pressed into each other's lips. It tasted of rain and hope and the hard-won certainty that they had survived the storm. Around them, the city of Greyhaven stretched out, bruised and battered but still standing. And as they broke the kiss and turned to face the street, hand in hand they stepped into an uncertain future together, bound not by debts, bound not by fear, but bound by a love that had survived when everything else fell apart. Thank you so much for reading this story. It has been a journey through the rain-soaked streets of Greyhaven with Emily and Dante, and I hope you enjoyed the ride as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please drop a comment below and tell me which country or city you call home. And if you enjoyed this story, Please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of danger, passion, and redemption. Share your thoughts in the comments. What did you think of Dante's sacrifice? I read every single one. Thank you for your support.